Title: How This Inmate Outsmarted a Maximum Security Prison. The Genius Escape of Richard Lee McNair. The Making of a Master Escapist. The story of Richard Lee McNair does not begin with an escape. It begins with a mind that refused confinement long before he ever stepped into a prison cell. To understand how one man outsmarted an entire maximum security system, we must first understand the environment, the psychology, and the choices that shaped him. Richard Lee McNair was born in 1958 in Oklahoma but spent most of his early life in North Dakota. By all accounts, he was an ordinary young man, polite, intelligent, athletic, and deeply respected in his community. Those who knew him during his youth would later struggle to reconcile the man they remembered with the criminal he eventually became. McNair was not a career outlaw, nor was he the stereotype of a hardened convict. Instead, he was a thinker, methodical, calculated, observant. Traits that, when pointed in the wrong direction, would later make him one of the most notorious escape artists in U.S. history. His descent into crime began with financial desperation. In 1987, facing increasing personal and economic strain, McNair carried out a burglary that escalated into a fatal shooting. One man was killed, another seriously wounded. McNair was arrested and charged with murder, attempted murder, and burglary. Though he accepted responsibility for the incident, the consequences were severe. He was sentenced to life plus 30 years. For most people, a sentence like that marks the end of freedom. For Richard McNair, it marked the beginning of a long, dangerous chess game between one inmate and the American prison system. Even before he entered federal custody, McNair displayed an unusual capacity for escape. While being questioned at a police station shortly after his arrest, he managed to slip out of handcuffs using lip balm to lubricate the restraints. He sprinted from the building only to be captured again a short time later. But his message was clear. He would not accept confinement quietly. Months later, while being held in county jail, McNair attempted another breakout, this time carving a hole through a ventilation system. That attempt failed as well, but it demonstrated something else: an extreme level of patience. He spent months studying guards' routines, airflow direction, and the structural weaknesses of the facility. By the time he was transferred to federal custody, McNair had already built a reputation among law enforcement as someone who required strict monitoring. Yet even under those conditions he managed the unthinkable. In 1992, while housed in a federal penitentiary in Louisiana, McNair executed his first successful major escape by crawling through a grate onto the prison roof and dropping to the ground below. He was free for nearly a day before being recaptured again. Each attempt increased his resolve. Each failure taught him something new about the weaknesses of the system. And the system taught something about him as well. He was not violent toward guards, he did not take hostages, he did not rely on weapons or chaos. He relied on intelligence, observation, and the ability to blend seamlessly into any environment. His escapes were silent, calculated, precise. These traits are what eventually led to his placement in the United States Penitentiary Pollock, a high-security federal prison designed to contain the country's most dangerous and most escape-prone offenders. Pollock was modern, heavily fortified, and closely monitored. It was a facility built for one purpose: to make escape impossible. But for a mind like McNair's, impossible was simply a challenge waiting to be decoded. Pollock offered inmates various work assignments, and McNair was eventually placed in the prison's industrial manufacturing area. Here, mailbags were sewn, repaired, and prepared for shipment. The role was monotonous for most inmates, but for McNair it was an opportunity, a laboratory for studying one of the few things that routinely left the prison walls: outgoing freight. Day after day he watched pallets being wrapped in plastic. He observed how guards inspected them. He noted the timing, the exit route, the blind spots, the moments when trust replaced caution. He became intimately familiar with the facility's rhythms. And he began to imagine the unthinkable. By early 2006, McNair had quietly constructed a plan that would shock the nation. He would hide himself inside a stack of industrial mailbags and have himself shipped, literally, out of a maximum security federal prison. It was bold, absurd, risky, and absolutely brilliant. The world had no idea that one of the most extraordinary prison escapes in modern American history was only weeks away. The mailbag masterpiece. By the start of 2006, Richard Lee McNair had transformed his work assignment in the prison manufacturing shop into a research laboratory. Every day he reported for duty, surrounded by industrial sewing machines, heavy canvas mailbags, shrink-wrap rolls, pallets, forklifts, and the steady rhythm of freight being moved in and out of Pollock's secured loading bay. Most inmates saw a labor assignment created to break monotony. McNair saw an exit strategy. The core of his plan was deceptively simple: hide in a place guards would never expect, using the prison's own systems against it. But the execution required discipline, deception, and near-perfect timing. He knew that even the smallest miscalculation would result in discovery, punishment, and the end of his freedom dreams. McNair spent weeks studying how outgoing shipments were handled. He observed which officers checked pallets thoroughly and which merely glanced at them. He documented the daily pattern of forklift movements. He noted the shift changes, lunch breaks, and the inevitable moments when staff attention dipped. Over time, he learned the one fact that made his plan feasible: outgoing freight was not subjected to the same invasive inspection as human movement. Guards focused on what came into the prison, not what left it. The mailbag area produced dozens of large canvas sacks each week. Once repaired or manufactured, they were placed into stacks, compressed, wrapped tightly in industrial plastic, and secured onto wooden pallets. These pallets were then wheeled through a lightly monitored corridor and out toward the freight dock, where a truck carried them beyond the fences and razor wire. The pallets were heavy, wrapped, and sealed. As long as the numbers matched and the wrapping appeared undisturbed, guards had no reason to suspect anything was hidden inside. McNair's plan involved constructing a concealed chamber within a stack of these bags. It required modifying several mailbags to create a hollow space large enough for him to fit inside, but small enough to maintain the pallet's expected shape and density. Using scraps of material and his sewing skills, he built a structure that looked identical to a normal stack but concealed an interior cavity. He even stitched ventilation holes into the fabric drain grommets so he could breathe without drawing attention. He then rehearsed, over and over. He practiced sliding into the cavity in silence. He practiced curling his body to minimize visible movement. He experimented with airflow and timing, ensuring he could remain inside the pallet for hours if necessary. Every detail mattered. Every mistake had to be eliminated. On the morning of April 5, 2006, he decided the conditions were optimal. It was just after a shift change and the warehouse was unusually relaxed. Officers were engaged in paperwork, and several were distracted with a pallet that had been mislabeled. McNair executed the first step. He slipped unnoticed into the storage area, crawled into the hollow chamber he had prepared, and pulled the final layer of mailbags over himself. He was now sealed inside the pallet. Minutes later, an unsuspecting forklift operator picked up the pallet. The machinery vibrated through McNair's concealed chamber as the stack was moved toward the shrink-wrapping station. He remained motionless while the operator spun layers of tight plastic around the pallet, including over the area that concealed him. The wrapping process took several minutes, and each turn of the plastic rendered him increasingly invisible to the outside world. A supervising guard walked over to inspect the pallets. He pressed his hands along the edges, checked the labels, and signed the paperwork. The pallet containing McNair, now wrapped, sealed, and approved, was placed near the dock doors with a cluster of others awaiting transport. McNair lay curled inside the pallet as it was wheeled through the corridor. He could hear the faint echoes of conversation. He could feel slight changes in temperature. Most notably, he sensed the shift in air pressure when the heavy metal door to the outside dock opened. For the first time since his incarceration, McNair was technically outside the secure perimeter. Once loaded onto the truck trailer, the pallets were stacked close together, wrapped in darkness. The doors slammed shut. Chains locked. The engine rumbled. And then, movement. The truck pulled away from the prison, carrying McNair toward open space and uncertainty. He waited. Patiently. Silently. Strategically. McNair's plan required him to delay his exit until he was far enough from the prison to avoid immediate detection. After nearly an hour, he used a small blade he had hidden inside his clothes to cut through the shrink wrap. He slid out of the pallet and quietly stepped onto the loading dock of a warehouse miles away. He was free. But his greatest challenge was yet to come: survival beyond the walls, evading a nationwide manhunt, and outsmarting law enforcement across multiple states. The manhunt and the legend. When Richard Lee McNair stepped out of that freight trailer on April 5, 2006, he did not sprint, panic, or behave like a man on the run. He walked calmly into the open air, stretched his muscles, and blended into the environment with the composure of someone who had rehearsed this moment for years. But what he could not rehearse was the world he was re-entering, a world ready to chase him with every law enforcement tool available. By midday, USP Pollock staff discovered the empty pallet cavity. A lockdown followed. Head counts were repeated. His absence was confirmed. The U.S. Marshals Service launched an immediate manhunt, notifying regional police departments and federal partners. What they didn't fully understand yet was that McNair was not simply an escaped prisoner. He was an escape strategist operating several steps ahead. McNair began his journey by traveling on foot, staying off major roads and avoiding populated areas. He understood that the first 24 hours were the most critical. Once he survived that window, the search radius would widen, and his movements would become more difficult to predict. He moved mostly at night, scavenged food, and relied on abandoned structures for rest. His plan was mobility, never staying in one place long enough to leave a pattern. Weeks turned into months, and McNair evaded capture with an unusual method: charm and adaptability. He crafted new identities, changed his appearance frequently, and blended into small communities where outsiders drew little attention. He worked temporary jobs, traded labor for shelter, and rarely stayed long enough for anyone to become suspicious. His intelligence made him dangerous. His social skills made him invisible. One of the most remarkable moments of his time on the run occurred on October 13, 2006, near Manhunt, North Dakota. A police officer named Sergeant Mike Bitts noticed a man jogging along a rural road early in the morning. The man seemed out of place, carrying a small backpack but showing no signs of distress. Bitts stopped to check on him. That man was Richard Lee McNair. What followed was a conversation so casual, and so deceptive, that it would later become a training video for law enforcement. Bitts asked the man for identification. McNair calmly said he had none, but gave a fake name and explained he was a traveling jogger passing through the area. Bitts asked more questions. McNair answered all of them with a polite, relaxed tone. He even smiled. Bitts, sensing nothing unusual, let him go. Only later that day, while reviewing wanted bulletins, did Bitts make the connection. He had unknowingly spoken face-to-face with one of America's most wanted fugitives, and let him walk away. By early 2007, McNair had traveled thousands of miles, living under the radar in Canada. He remained mobile, working odd jobs, sleeping in abandoned structures, and relying on survival instincts honed over years of planning. But freedom on the run is not freedom at all. McNair was constantly aware that a single mistake could expose him. That mistake came on October 24, 2007, in Campbellton, New Brunswick. A local police officer noticed a suspicious vehicle in a parking lot. Inside was a man asleep, surrounded by tools, documents, and multiple IDs, none in the same name. When questioned, he tried once again to talk his way out of trouble, but officers had already grown suspicious. A brief struggle ensued and additional units were called in. Fingerprints confirmed the truth: they had captured Richard Lee McNair. His 18-month run from federal custody was over. Following his recapture, McNair was transferred to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, the highest security penitentiary in the United States and home to terrorists, cartel leaders, and escape-proof inmates. At ADX, inmates spend most of their days in isolated confinement, monitored by reinforced steel doors, advanced surveillance systems, and protocols specifically designed to prevent escape attempts. For the first time in decades, McNair was placed in an environment engineered not only to contain him, but to anticipate him. He has never escaped again. Yet his legacy remains one of the most astonishing in modern prison history. McNair did not rely on violence, intimidation, or brute force. He relied on patience, intelligence, observation, and the ability to manipulate human trust. His story became a case study for correctional officers nationwide, an example of how one thoughtful, determined inmate can exploit cracks in even the most secure systems. Today, McNair's escapes continue to be analyzed in training rooms, criminal psychology courses, and law enforcement documentaries. He proved that the greatest security vulnerability is never the walls, the locks, or the cameras. It is the assumption that no one would dare attempt what he accomplished. His story remains a testament to the extraordinary lengths a human mind will go in pursuit of freedom, and how a single inmate forced America's prison system to rethink the meaning of secure.